Welcome, and thank you for tuning in. You're listening to the Beyond 50 radio program. I'm Daniel Davis. On the program, we thought we would approach something inevitably that most people who have at least lived to be midlife, that is, approaching or beyond 50, have probably faced, and that is tragedy or some type of trauma. The question is, though, is when we face such things, and we've heard certainly our share of stories, what do we do to possibly move beyond that and find peace? On the program today, we're going to be joined with someone who has a lot of experience, especially as a marriage counselor and family therapist, who has offered compelling stories from her books from decades of professionally healing families in tragic circumstances. We'll also learn how tragedy physically changes the brain and the body as well, and she also provides powerful techniques to help heal those invisible wounds and cope with the turmoil of our day. I'd like to welcome to the Beyond 50 radio program today our guest and author of the book Finding Peace in Times of Tragedy, Christy Monson. Christy, thank you for joining us here on the program today.
Thank you so much for having me, Daniel. I appreciate being here.
I can see how when you start off in the first chapter talking about your own experience, how someone would move into a direction with their life and helping others to overcome the obstacles they have faced. Tell us about that.
Well, when I was a young child, my father was killed in an automobile accident, and I was 6, and my mother just went to pieces. And my dad had always been, my mother was sort of volatile, and my dad was the steady one in our relation in the family. And so he'd put me to bed every night and rub my back. And so I really felt like the rug had been pulled out from under me when my father was gone. I can remember as a child standing by the window knowing that they told me that he was dead from an automobile accident, but waiting for him to come home. And so as a young child, I didn't really understand what was happening, but I tried to make the best sense I could out of it. So when I would go to bed at night, I would pretend that he was there with me, reading books and rubbing my back. And as time went along, I developed this into a kind of a creative imagery program that has really helped me heal through my life. I feel like I probably have, I don't know the answer to this, but I almost feel like I have a closer relationship with my father now than I would have if he had lived. Because, of course, he's always there from giving me his undivided attention in my mind. And so it has turned out to be a wonderful technique for me. And I have used this with my clients as I have gone along, and it really has been significant for them also.
You know, I remember as I was reading that story how it's really unique that people overlook a child's capacity to be intuitive but be very aware of what's going on, and the fact that it seemed that in your circumstance it kind of got strung along, that nobody was telling you anything, as though they were hiding you from inevitable trauma that you were about to face. And I think what really bothered me the most about that was the fact that here was an imprinting happening to you. You know, you wouldn't know this, of course, being the age of 6, but that actually is a tragedy in and of itself.
Yes, I agree with that. I didn't really say the part. I waited at the school, and nobody came to get me, and then the teacher and they were there, and they knew what had happened, but nobody said anything to me. And so that's kind of what you're referring to. I remember sitting under the table with my little brother, who was 2 years old, and we didn't know what was going on. There were a lot of people around the house, and so I just remember looking out and seeing all the legs. It's funny what memories you have, isn't it?
Well, it's true. And again, you think about that particular situation and perhaps moving forward in your life that, and it's just a shot in the dark, because I actually stewed on this for a while as I read that, and I thought a lot about it, how you might become someone who, in a very subtle way, begins to distance yourself or separate yourself even before you feel or sense tragedy or trauma is about to happen, and how others could view you as being uncaring or even insensitive without realizing what you had actually gone through at such an early age.
Yes, that is a very valid point, and good for you for figuring that out, because I do at times distance myself, and I do go inside myself, and I mentor myself a lot. Rather than reaching out to other people, I will a lot of times mentor myself because of that.
Now, it's really unique because what we're beginning to talk about here is tragedy and how it actually integrates into the human experience. It isn't just something that in the mind you remember, but it also has phases that in the body you have cellular memory. Why don't we go ahead and go from there?
All right. I just felt this is a fascinating thing that I learned when I did my master's degree and studied the brain. This was just such an interesting phenomenon to me, because I always will say to people if they're depressed or anxious or something's happened, oh, just get over it. It's okay. Just move beyond it. When you'd never say that to somebody that was in need of a heart transplant or had a broken bone or something, you would validate those. But sometimes we don't validate the things that are happening in our minds. And just to summarize, the hippocampus is the place where the hormone that secretes the hormone, and some of these cells are killed, really damaged when there's a tragedy that happens. And then the amygdala, that's the part of the brain that it takes that shuts down when the trauma happens. So it's difficult to really understand what's happening to you. And then, of course, the prefrontal cortex is also shut down and kind of damaged a little bit. And so when these things happen, then the amygdala, which takes the trauma, just goes wild. And so post-traumatic stress survivors are always looking for something to happen around the corner. They're unable to be in large crowds because there's that amygdala that's over-functioning and just giving these pulsations that scary things are going to happen, bad things are going to be there. And so the brain is set up in the brain, and we have to really be able to reprogram our brain to walk beyond this. I think it also happens in our bodies. The sympathetic nervous system, kicks in. We may want to fight back when somebody attacks us, or the parasympathetic nervous system becomes part of the action. And like a child, if a child is reprimanded by an angry parent for something, they may freeze, but they're still recording that anger inside. So even whether you do the fight or the flight, those memories are recorded, and we have to be able to work through them to let them go. And I might say at this point, I don't know that we ever completely overcome these things, but I think we can work with them enough and moderate ourselves enough that we really can live with what has happened to us. An interesting phenomena, I think, as you read through the book, is that the first incident that they put in the very first was the 9/11, the lady who survived the 9/11. And she just was wanting to shut it off and not ever go there again, because she told her boss 2 days after she wanted to go back to work. And so they put her in another building, which was like not as high as she had been in the World Trade Center, but 23 stories up. And she looked at that and thought, oh, goodness, can I go up there? And so she just has kind of shut that off. And she still has sometimes flashbacks that are there for her, but she just has walked beyond it, doing it that way without reprogramming or working through the trauma. And you know what? That works for her, and it's really good, but she has a hard time facing those kind of situations if they come up again. So, you see, we all have different ways that we handle it, and so sometimes people do just put it on the shelf and ignore it. But then they are not able to ever go into those kinds of situations again. And those of us who have dealt with it, I'm not saying that it's easy, and we can go into those situations without any problems, but we really do have to work through it if we're going to be able to confront some of those situations.
Well, the other thing too is, we have covered on this program over approaching 17 years now, and
Uh-huh.
of course, natural healing is one of the areas that's sort of a cornerstone of our show. And when you
Uh-huh.
take a look at this particular story of the woman from 9/11 who just shuts it off, uh, I see a potential tragedy that will express itself in a way that she might not find very good. And I'm not saying this is guaranteed, but for instance, we have talked about things like, severe disease, things such as cancer. And it seems to be one consistent thought in the world of natural healing is that cancer, like a lot of other diseases, are from, obviously, doctors will say more than 90% is from stress. When you think about a tragedy such as this situation with 9/11, you shut it off, so you're not allowing the body to actually process this whole thing in a very natural way that eventually it gets released. And you talk about the same thing in here as far as we hold that memory, and so when she holds, she's literally jailing that memory, and it's
That's correct.
energy, and that energy isn't good.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it can be good in its expression, but when it's not allowed to be expressed, you can see where I'm going with this.
Absolutely, and I agree with you 100%. And you're probably more knowledgeable about the natural healing techniques and cancer that does come from that than I am. But I do heartily agree with that, because a lot of the people that I had in therapy did have these kinds of illness, and I personally believe that a lot of it does come from stress and anxiety.
Now, let's go ahead and talk about, you were talking about how certain areas of the brain, what they do. The amygdala was the first thing. There was the hippocampus that actually recalls the memory, that sort of thing. But there was a particular chemical, I guess, that's released when this happens that actually kind of deteriorates that a little bit that you were talking
It
about.
does.
Okay.
Yeah, those chemicals, they in the hippocampus, that they kill some of the cells, so that we do have a hard time remembering what's happened. And then, of course, the amygdala goes into alert mode, and it can just run every which way. And then the prefrontal cortex, which is supposed to regulate those emotions, shuts down and doesn't work as well. So you see, that just gives the amygdala free rein to run in every direction, which is what happens with post-traumatic stress so much of the time.
Now, you give also for people who are finding peace in times of tragedy. There are exercises, ways that you can work through this. Now, give an example, for instance, how you possibly have worked your way through the tragedy that you experienced.
Well, my little kid brain, not knowing what it was doing, began to visualize my father reading books to me and spending time with me. And because I visualized this, then as I grew a little bit older, if I had problems or things, I would just curl up in a chair and we'd talk about it, and I would go into my head, and we have a cabin up in the Tetons, and so I'd walk in the forest and pretend forest and talking things over with him. And by the time I walked around the national forest a little bit, then I was to the point where I could figure out what I was going to do about my problem. We all have an internal capacity to heal ourselves. We all have internal wisdom. And I was unwittingly tapping into that in my own internal wisdom, because my father wasn't really there with me, but I was connecting with myself enough that I could talk it over and kind of decide what I was going to do, and then move beyond whatever the problem was, or solve whatever the problem was. So, and as I worked with my clients, it was interesting, because I had one cute lady. She was a horrific abuse survivor, and so when she was finally finished with therapy, she needed sometimes a little tune-up, and so I'd see her once in a while, and she'd say, oh, I just pretend that I'm talking to you in my head. She said, I just go in there and I get my problem solved because you and I are just solving that problem together. I think, what would Christy say? And so you see, it really wasn't me being there with her, but she had tapped into her own internal wisdom so she could figure out what she was going to do and how she was going to solve her problem.
And that's what I found really unique as I was reading through the book and the different stories that you share about the different tragedies, is how each person actually, works through these things, and everybody is different. It's suggested this day and age in a world of self-help that there's sort of a one shoe or one size fits everybody, but that's not true. It's just like, for instance, grieving. Everybody grieves differently. Some it's immediate and powerful, and for others it's long and quiet. You just never know. But the question is what to do and how to deal with it. And I think one of the stories that pops up that comes to mind in your book is the one you talk about, a woman who had suffered sexual abuse from her, I believe, stepfather. And I found the way that she worked that out was unique because how she went about it, but then I realized what she's also helping to do is to help to release cellular memory. Now, as you said, the experience really never goes away, but what we're really trying to do, what we want to do, is to release the emotional content of what actually happened, because that can become the real danger. Again, back to the 9/11 survivor. She's holding on to the emotion. She's jailing the emotional content. It's going to find a way to express itself. But let's go ahead and talk about this woman and how she worked it out, as far as, going to the gym and taking classes.
Yeah, she was a cute little spitfire.
I could believe that. I got a kick out of actually reading it.
Little tiny person. But she went to the gym and she got involved in kickboxing, and she loved that. She thought that was awesome. And as we worked through her memories, she had a duffel bag hanging, I can't remember where it was, in her garage or someplace, and so she plastered her stepfather's face on. She painted it on there, and she would box that and kick that, and it helped her release the memories. And so when she would come upon a memory, then that's how she would work through it and let it go. Now, and let me just back up a minute and say that there are some people that don't revisit the tragedy, that move beyond it with the guided imagery or the creative imagery. But there are some people that have to visit the memories. And she was one of those that had to visit the memories. So when they came up for her, then, boy, I knew the next day she'd be out there with that punching bag and her boxing gloves, just giving it her all to release that. And it was a really empowering thing for her, because it not only released the memory that she had logged in her brain, but it also was a physical release for her, which was empowering for her and really worked.
I couldn't help myself, but when I was reading that story, and I thought of the scene in the movie Forrest Gump, where Forrest and Jenny are standing, and she sees her house for the first time in a lot of years, and it's broke down and dilapidated, and she starts picking up rocks and throwing them at the house in anger. And he just simply says, sometimes we just don't have enough stones to throw. But you give it your shot, so... No, I appreciated what you just said, too, about how sometimes people don't want to maybe face the memory, or, they choose not to, whatever the case is. Now, there was a particular story in there, and I thought this was pretty important because I myself experienced a tragedy that thankfully didn't play itself out the way it could have. Unfortunately, though, in my mind, it played out for the longest time the way that I thought it could turn out. And I used to play this game, and my daughter was probably about 2.5 years old, where I liked chasing her around the house. It was just a lot of fun. Well, one day, I'm out in the driveway, and it's a very narrow street that we lived on, and even narrower once cars are parked out there. And I was working on the car, and she came walking out, and I could see her feet. So I came out from underneath the car, and I went to go and say, "Come here, sir," because she was walking toward the street. And there was
Yeah.
a car that was parked at the edge of the driveway, and I seen another car coming, probably doing about 20, 25 miles an hour, which really wasn't speeding on that street. And she was going right out to the street just as this car was coming. And I'll tell you, I couldn't have reached for her. There was just no way. But I was right there where I probably had another 3 or 4 feet before I could reach her. I don't know, God was on my side that day, but she got to the outer edge of the parked car, turned, stopped, and looked at me, and just as she'd done that, that's when the car went right behind her.
Oh.
Now, just, and so you can see that tragedy never happened, but the potential of it was just, and there I was. There would have been nothing I could have done.
Oh, yes.
And I was thinking of this, and so it goes back to the memory and also the emotion that I kind of wanted to share a little bit too, is the idea of how the mind can quickly go down that rabbit hole. But the reason I brought that story up is because of the one you talk about a man and a good friend of his and the tragedy they had experienced on the ice, where it was just out of reach. Yeah. And let's go ahead and talk about that, because I felt that these two stories are kind of about the same thing, and how he went to deal with that.
Yeah, that was such a difficult situation. He when he came into the office the first time, well, let me just tell what happened. He and his friend were on snowmobiles on Lake Michigan, and the ice freezes, and it, I'm sure, doesn't freeze all the way out to the middle, but they were out on the ice running their snowmobiles around, and his friend got a little bit too close to the edge of the ice sheet and fell in. And so this guy tried to get to his friend. He idled he took his snowmobile out as far as he could, and he idled it, and then he got off it and tried to crawl. Of course, he didn't want to stand up and walk, but disperse his weight to get his friend, but he couldn't get to his friend, and he watched his friend drown right there in front of him. It was just such a tragedy. And so when he came into my office, his muscles were just tense. In fact, he moved to to Las Vegas. He moved to Las Vegas as a fix. He wanted a geographic fix to try to get away from it. He thought if he got away from it, he'd be okay. But unfortunately, geographic fixes never work, and it followed him. And so he came into my office, and just tension all through his body. His neck was twitching. His hands were tight. His leg was jiggling. He just had so much tension. And so it took us quite a few sessions for him to work through that. But he did work out to release some of his physical tension. But he also reframed that. We talked about the positive experiences that he had, and he and the friend had saved a child. I forgot what it was. Help me pull that back. Was it a young person that was out fishing?
Yeah, and it was the idea of how he was reframing the whole thing or revisualizing it.
Yes, so that he and his friend were saving this kid, and he reframed it in a positive way. Sorry, I have to go back and always look at my case notes if I'm going to...
No, I totally understand. You've got a lot of it in here, but the whole thing was they went, and he had remembered there was a fishing trip that they were on where they had actually saved a little boy from drowning. Yeah. And that you would actually put like tennis balls in his hand, because I really thought that was really unique, because you're giving the opportunity for the person to feel something physical in their hands, as though they're actually, that's an arm they're grabbing or something like that.
Yes.
Yes. So.
Yes, and that was a powerful experience for him to do the creative visualization enough that he could go back and put that positive memory in there so that he had something good to think about. Another thing that this triggers in my head is the kids today love slime. My grandkids are always making slime. And that is such a good tension release. I mean, it's a silly stuff that can get all over every place, but it's a good tension release. When you've got a kid that's upset about something or working through something, there they are with that slime in their hands, just working it and working it and working it. And it's a good release. It's a way to release. And of course you can get tension balls and pressure balls that are good. And some people use those, which are also helpful.
Because in the end, even though we all do experience tragedies, some much deeper and harsher than others, it's easy to compare and say, well, I know you lost your job, but what about the people in the Holocaust? Yeah. But in the end, it's tragedy for everybody. Everybody is affected by it. And I remember, in fact, going back to 9/11, years ago, we had an expert who had actually spent 30 years uh, and studying and actually helping people through the grieving process. So considered to be one of
Interesting.
yeah, and he's considered to be one of the cornerstone people when it comes to grieving. And so I had shared a story, and I had realized after reading his book, I thought to myself, oh my goodness, from now on, I won't be that well-intentioned person that tries to say,
Yeah.
well, look at it this way kind of a thing. And the brief story was, there was a young woman that I was working with, and she had went through a breakup with her boyfriend. And certainly that's tragic enough.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what I decided to say in comfort surprised me because of the outcome. And that was, I said, I know this is rough. It's never easy in a breakup. But someone out there somewhere probably has it a little rougher than you do. And I didn't say it as harsh as maybe that sounds. It was really in sincerity.
Yeah.
We all do
Yeah,
this.
Yeah.
The very next day, 9/11 happened. And so she says, damn, you were really right. And I didn't mean to be right like that. But I shared that story with this guy as we did the broadcast, and I'd realized after reading his book, how dare I do something like that, because I totally took her tragedy away from her and made it seem insignificant, and it's not. And I've never done it since, and that was years ago. It's like, well, would you like to talk about it, is more or less my response, or just keep my mouth shut and be with them and let them talk if they want to, but it's never easy, but that happens a lot, doesn't it?
It does happen a lot, and I think the watchword for all of us needs to be listening and compassion. If I were to say two words, those would be the words: to listen and have compassion, because people don't really need you to fix it, because they have got the internal wisdom to fix themselves. We just need to be there to be a vehicle of understanding and listening and compassion. I just feel like that is the watchword. If I could ever say anything to anybody, that's true. But sometimes we do want to just fix it, and we can't do that.
Or take on the pain as though we're actually easing any pain that's occurring. But that's certainly a journey people really have to kind of do on their own. However, in time, it also, as you talk about, it's okay to reach out and garner the help of others outside of yourself when the time is right, correct?
Absolutely, and it's going to be different for everyone. I loved using art with the people that I worked with, because art is a vehicle to release. I can't remember if I put this example in the book or not. I don't know if I did. I had a lady in Vegas that had been ritually abused, not only sexually, but ritually abused. And it was frightening, scary figures and fire and sacrificial animals. It was awful. And she was an artist, and she drew and drew and drew. And some of these figures that she drew, these big, gigantic, monstrous demons that she saw in the firelight, were, I'm sure, just men, but she was a kid when all this happened. And the art was really a terrific vehicle for her to get this out, to release what was inside of her. And so I have art. She taught me a lot about art, and I took several art therapy classes after that. And art is a wonderful way to release. And so sometimes that's better than writing. Sometimes writing is good for people. Sometimes non-dominant handwriting is good for people. Sometimes art is good. So there are many ways to release feelings.
And I think the key thing that we're talking about here certainly is this, and that is that you learn to release. You'll never forget. That's there.
True.
But what you're releasing is holding on to the emotional energy, and that's the key, the emotional energy of the experience. That doesn't mean it'll be completely gone, but certainly like in the case with the tragedy of the two friends snowmobiling, you find that over time, as you work with this, that you're releasing that. And then you begin to actually start remembering them in a different light, like not so much on the tragedy, but the fact that, man, we had a lot of great memories. It's, for instance, I remember a good friend of mine who had a parent pass, and in talking with her, I said, you don't seem real troubled about this. I mean, this just happened like not even a week ago. And she says, one of the most amazing things happened. He says, when I first got the news, no doubt about it, it was overwhelming, like, oh, my God, But she realized I had a long life with my parent. But most importantly, I remember there was one night, and this was just a few days apparently after her parent had passed. She says, I was sitting outside looking at the stars, and I realized I had absolutely no regret. I wasn't there when it happened, when she died, but I realized there was nothing I needed to say to her before that happened. No regrets about what I didn't say or do, that I totally felt that I had lived my life in the way that she would have been proud of. So she says, yeah, it's sad, and I have flashes that I realize I'll never see her again. There's no doubt about that. But overall, I feel really at peace. And it was just a really amazing thing to versus other people. They're gone for weeks or months in the dark. It's amazing how different it can be.
I love that. I think that's beautiful, the way she framed that. I think people that struggle with their guilt have a harder time working through it than people who don't. Well, I should have done this. Well, I should have done that. And she realized that there was nothing more she could do. Sometimes we'll say, well, my mom had cancer. Well, I should have taken her to the doctor sooner. I should have got hospice involved sooner. I should have done this. I should have done that. And so we can beat ourselves up. But this may sound crass, but, none of us can play God. We cannot change things like that. And your friend was wise in that. She was able to let go and be at peace. That's a beautiful story. I love it.
And the fact that as it was being told, I realized you could hear the essence and the energy from it was, as I said, she really said, I felt at peace just a few days after the passing. And wasn't around for when things got really bad. I was just out, kind of doing my thing. But the most important thing I think I took from it was almost like there was this soft something that came in, and she realized this is okay. And I feel okay about feeling like that. And that was the amazing part about the whole thing. It leads me to ask you this question here. Have you ever had anyone ask you, or I'll just straight ask you, is there a difference between tragedy and trauma?
Oh, that's a very interesting question. That's a very good question. Tragedy, I don't know the definitions. We'd have to go look them up. But trauma is something that is ongoing, or the word feels more ongoing to me. And a tragedy is something that is an immediate happening. I don't know, maybe people would define that differently.
I don't know that we need accurate definitions in as much as you're someone who has had an experience of tragedy and certainly have had trauma as a result. I think it's pretty direct that way. So I wondered about that because sometimes you'll hear that, it'll be they suffered a trauma. Okay, well, then it's the incident. Or there's this tragedy and you wonder, are those two supposed to be the same or is there a difference? Because clearly, as you separated the different areas of the brain, for instance, that have an effect from a tragedy, people realize that, they're empowered to say, there's something I can probably do about this. And I think it goes the same way with just these two words here, perhaps.
I like what you just have said because I think it is so wise. Perhaps there is something I can do about this. If I am able to take action, I pull myself out of the victimization place, which is where I feel sometimes when a tragedy or a trauma has happened. And I begin to find a way to heal. I go through my healing process. So I think taking action is one of the most important things that we can do. And whether you're doing that with the guided imagery or the creative imagery, or whether you're doing it with the body work, or whether you're getting your anger out by throwing the rocks at the house, we're walking beyond it. And I feel like that's important.
Well, Christy, this is certainly a wonderful book that I think people will find a lot of value from. And I think more importantly is that what you don't share too often in the exercises in the book is rehashing your story. Yeah, and sometimes you hear a lot about that in therapy, that you'll spend weeks and weeks and weeks just retelling the story until the therapist finally gets you to the point where, okay, can we do something about it now? And I think people do that enough on their own without having somebody to actually, coach them along to do the very same thing. And I think one of the easiest exercises people can do that I found in here, and it's something we all can easily do, is breathing. Why is that one important?
Isn't that interesting? I just
the
think
most
it's
easiest exercise we can all do that would actually give us almost instant relief, from the thought, the experience, any of it. But let's talk about that one.
Okay, that's very good. And I have found, with my children and my grandchildren, you say, okay, breathe. And that sometimes is enough to dissipate it. As we intake air, we come into the moment, and it's like a meditation, a beginning of a meditation. As I breathe in very slowly, maybe to the count of 4 or 5, and then breathe out slowly to the count of 8, 7 or 8, 10, or however you want to do it. There's multiple ways of doing this, but I think as we begin to focus that, what that does is it takes our mind off. Our mind is kind of like a wild horse that can run around and in every direction at once. And as we begin to breathe, we take our mind from that place and put it into a more meditative state and allow ourselves to just calm down a little bit. It takes that anxiety, takes us from the place of anxiety. So deep breathing exercises are wonderful before you start your creative imagery, or before you rewrite your story, or whatever you decide, before you do your artwork. It will center you and bring you to a place of calmness and peace, and then you can go forward with whatever you decide to do to heal yourself.
And I think, as anyone will find, should they make the choice, and it ultimately is a choice, that you want to move toward peace, you will then begin to discover that there is wonderful opportunity and gifts within the tragedy. And one great example that you give in there is the one of the veteran who ended up in an explosion, losing his leg, going through several surgeries, and actually the blessing that the partner felt about all of this. It took time, but began realizing that all around her there was this huge community of veterans, each in their own unique ways, finding ways to reach out to help others through their experiences to get through their own. And that's the amazing part, as you begin to see just how kind the world is, even in light of how the news would tell us it isn't. It's a lot kinder than you think it is.
That's so true. I just finished a book of 50 biographies of kind people, and one of them was Fred Rogers. And when he was a child, he had a lot of anxieties, and he worried about things a lot. And his mother said to him, don't look at the tragedy. Look for the helpers. Look at the helpers that are there. Because whenever you find a tragedy, you're going to find the helpers that are there. Just like this not Vietnam, but this Afghanistan boy found. The helpers are always there. And I am always humbled by the capacity that we have to help each other and love each other and be there for each other. It just makes me have, I mean, I know we can say the world is going to hell in a handbasket or whatever, but I just always like to focus on the beauty of the service and help that other people give. It just warms my heart.
And certainly I remember watching a movie not too long ago where a person was telling someone, I just feel totally alone in this world. Well, you're never alone, the person says. Yes, I am. He says, no, let's take a look around you. And they were out by a pond. Well, see that duck over there? Perhaps that bird in the sky? How about that squirrel over there? You really still feel like you're alone?
Yep.
You're never really alone.
No.
Wow.
And I love that point because I do love to center myself in nature, whether I'm at the beach or whether I'm in the mountains or whether I'm by the lake. That is always very centering to me, and I think to all of us. That's why parks are created in every city, so that we have some place we can go and be with nature, because I think that is centering for us.
Well, and as we're talking about here, the most amazing tools are all available to us. We just have to decide that it's time to use them if we do want to pursue and experience peace in our lives, especially in times of tragedy. Wonderful book, Christy. Is there any final thoughts you'd like to leave with our listeners?
No, I just appreciate so much your allowing me to be with you. I love to talk about this, and I would just encourage your listeners to find their own way to heal. The one thing I will say about the book, Dennis Carradine has been so helpful to endorse the book. He is CEO of the Trauma Survivors Foundation. So if anybody does want to buy the book, you can get it on Amazon or around and about. But if you buy it through the Trauma Survivor Foundation, then the monies from the book will go towards his foundation, which has been so helpful for people in their healing process.
The book is Finding Peace in Times of Tragedy. Our guest today, Christy Monson, joining us. Christy, thank you for being on the program today. It's been wonderful.
Thank you so much, Daniel, for having me. I have enjoyed it so much. Take care. Have a great day.
You too. We want to thank you, the listeners out there, for joining us. You can discover more at beyond50radio.com. That is the number 50. We do encourage you to sign up for our weekly e-newsletter to keep up to date with what's going on in the world of Beyond 50, as well as our upcoming shows. I'm Daniel Davis. Thank you for joining us. This is the Beyond 50 radio program. And remember, live your day past halfway.